Welcome to the Top 1% Men podcast by LGFG Fashion House, where we interview millionaires and billionaires and other men who fit within the top 1% as verifiable by quantifiable metrics such as wealth, physical fitness, and other notable life achievements. On the Top 1% of Men podcast, participation trophies don't count and man buns are not allowed. We're here with Edward Lambert. So I'll give you guys a little bit of a preview to Edward. I met Edward more than 10 years ago. Edward is the co-founder and proprietor of Lambton Tailoring, which is a company that supplies tailors and tailor shops and retail stores with their best products. And Edward, how many retailers do you now supply?
About 200.
So 200 retailers, guys and gals, that's not a little. And the company is based out of Leeds, United Kingdom. And tell us about the history of how you started the company.
We started the company, my partner and I, in 1990 as a travelling tailoring business, doing sales around the city of London. My family business was using CAD computers to develop patterns for clothes, and had written a very clever piece of software that manipulated the patterns to an individual's measurements.
Okay. So your family business, meaning that your dad had a company that created patterns for clothes.
Yes.
And and your first idea was, let's adapt that particular software into making patterns for individual clients.
Now, my first idea was actually not to go into that business.
Oh, tell us more.
It was built on technology that was already mostly outdated. And incredibly expensive. I think the first CAD computers that the company, which was called Complan, purchased were nearly £500,000 in the late 70s. And at that point, not even the biggest UK manufacturers could afford this sort of technology. So it was used on a bureau basis, whereby people would rent space on the computers to do lay planning and pattern design. When I was asked to join the business by my father in 1990, I figured that this had no scalability at all. Fortunately, I met who is now my business partner, Matthew Norton, who persuaded me that actually the future was in tailoring and travelling tailoring, and they wanted to use the technology that was being developed. And so I saw that as a scalable opportunity. And we founded a business together one afternoon. At the time, I had zero knowledge of tailoring. I trained as a boat builder, but had arrogantly thought that if you can work with flat materials and make a boat, you can work with flat materials and make a suit. So off we went, and we built the business over 10 years to about $3 million turnover, and but was struggling with supply. So we then opened our own factory in the UK. I think we're probably the last people in the UK to open a manufacturing facility, but it taught us a lot about the trials and tribulations of actually making the product rather than just producing a pattern for the product. We also realized that we didn't have enough orders to sustain the factory 12 months of the year. So we started offering the capacity to other tailors in the UK. In 2004, we felt that we needed to expand our production, and the UK wasn't the place to do it. Even then, finding labour was difficult. So we went overseas. The first place we went was the Czech Republic, which was a fantastic insight into the power of really big manufacturing from my perspective. Met the most amazing chap, Willie van Overdijk, who had the skill to cut a pattern, the skill to make a suit, and a personality that could sell you ice to the Eskimos. Just a fantastic man. And he and I built the first made-to-measure line in the Czech Republic. The steady march east from Western European economies to find cheaper labour and supply moved us then to China via Malta, and eventually we ended up about 15 years ago in southern India, where we remained.
That's wonderful. So there's a couple of things I picked up from there, and I wanted to exploit those principles. So first of all, supplying retailers was not the business you started.
No.
You started a business and going to end consumers and selling them clothing.
Yes.
And so a lot of businesses don't start out in the direction that they end up in. For example, I think about Nintendo that started as a board game company and ended up, one of the largest video game companies. Video games didn't even exist when Nintendo started in the board game business. And you see a lot of that kind of thing going on. So your initial business idea, and you go into this tailoring business at first, and you don't know what you're doing. Like, you have no experience, no background, but you just go for it.
Yeah.
So what made you just go for it?
I've never been employed by anybody.
Okay.
So that's not true. I had a job in the US for a very short period of time. I've always started my own businesses and always believed in myself. I guess I was given a very broad and great education that gave you the confidence. Just do it.
Okay. So that's another interesting thing. So we know from this podcast that 50% of all millionaires are made from small business ownership, like people that start their own businesses. So you start your own business. Now, is your family entrepreneurial?
Yes.
Okay. So you had an example in your father.
Yes.
What are some principles that you picked up from him that you transliterate into your life?
I think my father went the other way. He did corporate, and then he went into being an entrepreneur. So he had probably a lot more formal skills to be a businessman than I did. I had hunger and probably a belief that I was not going to make it in corporate.
Okay.
Because I felt the qualifications I'd had from college weren't sufficient enough to get up the corporate ladder. In hindsight, when I could meet some of the people in corporate, I realized I could have risen quite well in corporate.
That's actually one of the, well, we don't know that. It's actually really interesting you say that. So that's another thing that I've sort of thought about a lot, because I think there is a level of insecurity that drives entrepreneurship, where it's like, well, maybe I can't compete with all those Harvard educated guys, whatever, because they're so, let's say, on paper qualified. And then a lot of my friends, as I was kind of going through the motions of building a business, they would say, you're actually like sharper than these guys and those guys. And I'd have a hard time believing it. Like, I don't have an MBA, like I'm not in that route. And then now, like you said, now I talk to some of those people, I'm like, oh my God, they're tools. But here's the thing, I don't know if I would have succeeded in the corporate environment, not because of, lack of capacity to do so or lack of work ethic. I mean, the work ethic, dedication, resiliency you have as an entrepreneur is phenomenal. It's more so that there's a political game that happens in there. And I'm not sure I would have the patience, certainly probably the cunning, like, we're in sales, we're entrepreneurs, but I don't know if I'd have the patience to play that political game. And I don't know if it would morally align with me, because there is a jousting for position in the corporate world, whereas in the, as an entrepreneur, the world is your oyster.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So I don't know if I would have succeeded. I might have just been terminated for being insubordinate or something when I had to, follow stupid rules. And that's probably a big thing that drives a lot of entrepreneurs, is not wanting to follow stupid rules.
That is correct. If you follow the rules in small businesses, you won't succeed. You've got to think outside the box. You've got to be one step ahead of the corporates. You don't have the financial muscle they have to do research and development. You can't buy the best software. You've got to write it yourselves. You don't have access to just the scale that corporate offer.
100%. So they're kind of like the muscle, and we're kind of like the brains. We have to operate. We're like the chameleons in the world. We have to operate, and make connections, kind of weave our way through. And they're just the bulldozer.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, you hope that your business will be big enough for a corporation to buy. Corporations grow by harnessing entrepreneurs' ideas and businesses. Mm-hmm. They get to a scale that is worthy of them, their balance sheet, and that's where we're trying to get our business.
When it comes to personal relationships, like getting married, like all that kind of stuff, what are some advice you would give to young guys that haven't gone through that and they're considering, what are the costs and benefits of doing that while building a business?
Find someone who really understands the time it requires to build a business. It's a selfish enterprise, building a business. It's 24/7. every bad thought comes to you at 3 o'clock in the morning. God, how am I going to survive tomorrow? What happens if? What happens if? What happens if? And it's draining. It is very draining.
So you need somebody that really supports you.
Yeah, really supports you. Really gets it. It really gets that actually, making the money is just difficult. And those opportunities where you made some surplus. Oh, darling, can we buy this? No, we need to buy a new sewing machine. It's like it's that.
So you have to keep principled in the good times.
Yeah, you don't have a balance sheet. Without a balance sheet, you can't raise funds, or you couldn't when I was starting businesses. You couldn't even hedge currency without using 10% of the value of the hedge in the 80s and 90s. So everything was about your ability to fund yourself. And there wasn't crowdfunding. There was, there was the stuffy city that said, oh yes, if you want to borrow £5 million, that's easy. You want to borrow £500,000, that's impossible, without putting your house on the line. Literally a dick on the line. You were always living that.
That's really interesting because, there's this misconception amongst young people that it was easier to succeed. Our parents had it easier. Not true at all. Now we do have access to more opportunities to get our message out to the world. We have a direct access to consumers. I mean, I remember when, starting out in sales, there was no internet to look up things. It was like, you get a phone book and you have to find something in a phone book. Imagine that. There were no cell phones. You have to use a payphone. If you have a meeting, with somebody at a certain place and they're not there, you might never meet them because there's no way to reach them. So a lot of the very sort of strenuous operational things have gotten a lot easier. There's a lot more access to capital. There's a lot more access to knowledge, to information. And frankly, I think people are hustling a lot less. Like I tell young people, I think it's easier today to be in business and succeed because you can just focus on the core money-making activities, whereas before you had to deal with, you can't hedge a currency. Or you couldn't, like now, here's how we hedge a currency now. We go online and we click a button.
Yeah.
And that's it. Or on my phone, I go look. And now you have to go to the bank and do the process and the papers.
Finding suppliers, finding everything that required your business to function was literally get a phone book, read a newspaper, find an advert. The networking wasn't LinkedIn. It was your Rolodex, and your Rolodex was everything.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have the ability to really focus on finding great suppliers, you just didn't succeed. When I worked in America, I realized that that was what service was about. They got and probably still get service. It's no surprise that Amazon is Amazon.
Yeah.
Even in the 80s when I was making kitchens, you could order a hinge at 1 o'clock one day and by 9 o'clock the next morning it was there. And if it wasn't, the company supplying it didn't last. When I came back to building suits in England, the manufacturer told me that the delivery rate was going to be X, and you book your appointment with your customer for the following day, and day X arrived. Where's my suit? Oh, we're just about to start it. Yeah. And the analogy that I came up with in about Britain in the 80s compared to the US, that in the US, if your boss had a Cadillac, your aim was to have two. In England, if your boss had a Rolls Royce, your aim was to scratch it. And the service level just went with that mindset. Creating wealth was almost a dirty word, but nobody wanted to go into industry. Everybody wanted to go into finance, and so industry in the UK really struggled to recruit, and still does, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because you require, firstly, industry requires a lot of capital. I mean, you've been around our factories here in southern India, and these are incredibly well capitalized enterprises. Whereas, if you want to make money in media or whatever, get yourself a laptop and a mobile phone and you're off. So your capital's, $1,000.
Look, you can fail at both. The key now is that with these businesses that are more sort of, the what's the word I'm looking for? Hang on, it's not going to need a minute here. With a remote entrepreneur, the nomad entrepreneur, you can be successful with a phone and a computer. But you can also fail faster. That's what the thing is I tell young guys. It's like failure is not a bad thing. You start in one business, you end up in a different business. You've had various iterations in your business. Obviously, we talked about that, where things go up and down. That's part of business. The average millionaire files bankruptcy in the U.S. 3.2 times, which is absolutely insane. A lot of people don't know that, but the actual statistic. So there's a lot of failure. But you have an opportunity now to fail faster. So you get a chance to figure out what works, what doesn't work, but you have to adjust, and you have to adjust what works, what doesn't work. One thing you said about relationships that's fascinating is, I do tell this to all the young guys that, for example, work in our company that are going to be working 60, 70, 80 hours a week building a business, is that your partner, your girlfriend, your wife, whatever, they just need to support you wholeheartedly, uninhibitedly, just completely support you. And a lot of times what I've noticed, and this has been a consistent pattern, is sometimes, you're building a business and your girlfriend says, I want more attention, and she tries to get your attention off the business. And here's what happens. If you put your girlfriend above your business, you will lose both. I've seen it many, many times. You have to have a partner that supports you and that puts your business first as well. So that's really important. Another thing we picked up here is, Edward, you did have a dad that was an example too, and that gave you some guidance and some mentorship. That's important too. Again, we talk about all the young men right now that don't have that example. That's why we run this podcast. You have an opportunity to, we have an opportunity to impress upon you what it's, how important mentorship is. Go out and get a mentor. Find somebody more successful than you with good principles that you admire, so that you can emulate them and be in service to that person, so that they want to help you. We talked about growth mindset. How in America, if your boss has a Rolls Royce, you want to own two, or a Cadillac, you want to own two. But in Great Britain, it was like, if you own a Rolls Royce, if you're the boss, your employees want to scratch it. So that's talking about growth mindset versus scarcity mindset. That's one of the reasons America became so powerful as an economic force, because they educated their people in entrepreneurship mindset and the American dream, which is you can have it too, which is there's more than enough for everybody. You just have to step up to the plate and take a swing.
Also, in America, you had to make it. There was no welfare state. It's not that I don't approve of the welfare state. It just goes too far into the economy. In the UK, there's too much handouts and not enough hand-ups.
And that's a problem. It's like Margaret Thatcher said, socialism works until you run out of other people's money. And one of the things America did in a really nice way, and I really admire that, is they did make it so that people had to make it. And sometimes, so much of the economy is run on desperation. So much of human partnering, coupling is run on desperation. And we think that we make things better when we make them easier. And I ask you a question, things can get easier, but do they get better? And the answer has consistently been no. Because we don't, it's like we don't build the muscles that we need in order to do the things that we need to accomplish, to move the obstacles we need to move. So, Edward, I want to thank you for your time. So 200 retailers being supplied by Lambton Tailoring all over the world. You were making waves as the last factory to open in England for custom suits, but also the first factory in the Czech Republic for custom suits. So you've been on both ends of the cycle, traveled the world, and created a fantastic company. And I hope you guys learn some principles and ideas from this episode. Thank you.